When we talk about emotional detachment, true emotional detachment, we're not talking about indifference. Indifference is brittle. It's a mask that still hinges on being seen. Emotional detachment, the kind that signals to the narcissist that something irreversible has taken place, is something else entirely. It's the calm after the psychological storm, the silence that emerges when the inner chaos has finally settled. It's what happens when you've processed the grief, mourned the illusion, and realized that the weight you carried for so long wasn't yours to begin with. You see, narcissists don't fear your anger. They don't fear your confrontation, your desperate attempts to make them understand, or even your temporary absence. What they fear, what shakes them to their core, is your emotional neutrality. That's the moment the narcissist knows you've walked away internally, even if you're still physically in the room. That's when they realize the control they once held has slipped through their fingers. Not because you shouted or slammed the door, but because you simply stopped playing the game. This is not a trivial shift. It's a psychological event, profound and unsettling for someone who has thrived on your emotional reactivity. The narcissist's sense of identity is built on a fragile scaffolding of control, attention, and emotional dependency. When you detach, when you stop feeding that scaffolding, the entire structure begins to collapse. And what's left isn't some powerful, commanding figure. It's a hollow, frightened child masquerading as a god. To detach emotionally is to reclaim your sovereignty. It's to remove the mirror the narcissist depends on for self-recognition. They need you not as a person, but as a reflection. As long as you were angry, hurt, or confused, they still saw themselves as relevant. They could still draw meaning, however perverse, from your pain. But when you stopped responding, when the light in your eyes that once searched for their approval went dim, they were forced to confront their own emptiness. And that, for them, is intolerable. What's interesting here is the philosophical dimension. In many traditions, Stoicism, for example, the highest form of strength isn't aggression, but restraint. It's not about overpowering another. It's about no longer being overpowered by your own chaos. Detachment, then, is a sign of disciplined introspection. It's the clarity that comes when you realize that someone else's dysfunction is no longer your responsibility to fix, or even to hold space for. But reaching that state is not easy. It takes work, deep, uncomfortable, often solitary work. You have to confront your own needs, your own illusions. You have to ask yourself why you tolerated mistreatment in the first place. Was it hope? Was it fear? Was it a belief deeply embedded that you didn't deserve better? Detachment isn't passive. It's the outcome of a long, hard battle with the self. And when you arrive at that still point, when your nervous system no longer leaps at their messages, when you no longer rehearse conversations in your head, that's when your transformation becomes real. That's when they feel it. And they do feel it. Maybe not in words, because narcissism often involves a deep denial of reality. But they feel the loss of your energy. They feel the absence of your attention. They feel your silence, not as emptiness, but as a threat to their fragile ego. That's the moment they know you're not just gone, you've transcended the dynamic entirely. That's why, paradoxically, the most powerful statement you can ever make is no statement at all, no grand speech, no vindictive send-off, no need for closure from someone incapable of giving it. Just stillness. Just the quiet certainty that your life no longer bends around their gravity. They can sense that shift intuitively, because for the first time, their presence doesn't move you, and that is the moment they truly understand they've lost you. Your detachment isn't cruelty. It's maturity. It's psychological evolution. And it's a signal not just to them, but to yourself, that you've crossed a threshold. You've chosen clarity over chaos, integrity over illusion, and peace over performance. And that's when the narcissist finally knew you were never coming back. Because when you no longer need to explain your worth, that's when your strength becomes undeniable. When you begin to set boundaries, real boundaries, not the kind you whisper and hope, but the kind you enforce with action, something fundamental changes. Not just in your relationship with the narcissist, but within your own psyche. That shift, though it often feels small in the moment, marks the beginning of your emancipation. And that's precisely the point when the narcissist starts to panic. You have to understand, for a narcissist, boundaries aren't just obstacles, they're existential threats. They disrupt the flow of narcissistic supply, which is the emotional oxygen the narcissist breathes. When you establish a boundary, you're not just saying no, you're saying, I exist independently of you. You're declaring that your thoughts, feelings, and needs have intrinsic value, regardless of how the narcissist perceives them. And that declaration breaks the illusion that the narcissist is the axis around which your world spins. From a psychological standpoint, this is about individuation. Carl Jung spoke of the process by which a person integrates the conscious and unconscious elements of the self, forming a whole. Part of that process is learning to differentiate yourself from others, especially from those who have colonized your identity. Narcissists are experts at emotional colonization. They invade your boundaries subtly at first, presenting their preferences as your responsibilities, their moods as your fault, their expectations as your obligations. Over time, you begin to forget where they end and you begin. So, when you draw a line in the sand, whether it's I won't accept being shouted at, or I will not engage in circular arguments, you are reclaiming territory. You're asserting your right to psychological sovereignty. And make no mistake, that's a confrontation, even if it's delivered softly. Because to the narcissist, who has grown accustomed to dominance through manipulation, any form of self-assertion on your part reads as betrayal. And here's where things get especially revealing. When you set a boundary and the narcissist responds with rage, guilt-tripping, or silent treatment, they are exposing the fragility of their control. They are showing you quite clearly that they never respected you, they only controlled you. That's a painful realization, but a necessary one. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's where your strength begins to crystallize. You start to recognize that peace is not found in managing another person's reactions, but in managing your own responses. You stop trying to make them understand, and you start understanding yourself. You become less concerned with being seen and more committed to seeing clearly. Now, here's a nuance that often gets missed. Setting boundaries isn't about changing the narcissist. It's not a strategy to get them to behave better or love you more. That's still rooted in codependency. Boundaries are about defining the terms of your own engagement with reality. They're a statement of self-respect, not a tool of persuasion. Once you make that shift from external focus to internal alignment, you become ungovernable in the best sense of the word. And again, the narcissist senses this, maybe not cognitively, because their self-awareness is often limited, but they feel it. They feel your detachment, your centeredness, your unwillingness to be baited. And in that moment, they lose their leverage. Because now, their approval is no longer your compass. Their disapproval no longer dictates your actions. You've begun to act from principle rather than pressure. That's when things escalate or unravel. Often they'll lash out, testing your boundaries more aggressively, hoping to provoke the old version of you. And it's tempting, especially when you're tired or afraid, to collapse back into the familiar dysfunction. But if you hold steady, if you stay rooted in your values, something remarkable happens. The narcissist is forced to confront their own impotence. They realize the old tactics no longer work. And because their identity was built on the assumption that they could control you, the loss of that power is psychologically destabilizing. This isn't about vengeance, it's about liberation. It's about stepping out of the dance entirely, refusing to be led in a choreography of pain. Your boundaries are not weapons, they are declarations of personhood, and once they're in place, firm, consistent, non-negotiable, the narcissist is left with a choice. Adapt, which is unlikely, or disappear. Either way, you're free. And in that freedom lies the unspoken truth. When you finally chose yourself, the narcissist knew they had lost you for good. When you stop reacting, when you stop feeding the drama, when you stop emotionally dancing to the narcissist's tune, that's when the power dynamic truly begins to shift. Not through confrontation, not through explosive exits, but through the quiet refusal to participate in the chaos. And this moment, this silence of the soul, can be more destabilizing to the narcissist than any shouted ultimatum. You see, narcissists thrive on reaction. That's their lifeblood. It's not even about whether your response is positive or negative. Either one will do. They're not looking for harmony. They're looking for relevance. When you cry, yell, beg, explain, or even justify yourself, you are still locked in the game, still revolving around them, still validating their role in your inner world. But when you don't react, when you meet their provocation with stillness, you break the frame. You introduce disorder into their carefully constructed illusion of control. Psychologically, this is significant. It's the withdrawal of emotional energy, and it's often interpreted by narcissists as abandonment, rejection, even annihilation. Why? Because their identity is deeply contingent on the ability to evoke a response. Their entire model of reality is relational, but not in the healthy, mutual sense. It's exploitative. It's transactional. They press a button and they expect a result. If that result doesn't come, their sense of control begins to disintegrate. This is one of the most difficult transitions for those recovering from narcissistic abuse, to move from emotional entanglement to emotional sovereignty, because that reactive impulse is deeply conditioned. You've been trained to interpret every mood, every silence, every sigh as a signal that you must now fix something. You've likely internalized the belief that peace comes from managing the narcissist emotions instead of managing your own. This is where the real strength begins to emerge, not as defiance, but as disengagement, not as rebellion, but as clarity. You begin to see the manipulation for what it is, a pattern, a script, a loop. You stop playing your part. You let the accusations fall flat, the bait dangle unbitten, the tantrums echo into emptiness. And this non-engagement, it's not apathy, it's not coldness, it's maturity. It's the deep understanding that not every invitation to battle deserves your RSV. Philosophically, we can turn to Viktor Frankl here, who reminded us that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power, our freedom. The narcissist wants to collapse that space. They want to own your reaction, to compress your sense of self down into their drama. But when you pause, when you breathe, observe, and choose, you reclaim your agency. You become someone who responds with intention rather than reflex. And again, this does not go unnoticed. In fact, this kind of emotional silence is often what finally pierces the narcissist's delusion. Not because they suddenly become self-aware, but because they feel the vacuum, the absence of supply, the shift in gravitational pull. They realize, often before you do, that you're no longer in orbit, and it frightens them. That's when they might escalate, try harder to provoke, to insult, to gaslight. But don't misread that as strength. That's not control. That's desperation. It's the psychological equivalent of a drowning person flailing for a life raft. Only in this case, the life raft is your emotional submission. And here's a truth that's hard to accept but crucial to integrate. Not reacting isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about revealing the truth of the relationship. That when you stop playing your role, the whole performance collapses. There was no intimacy, only illusion. No mutual care, only dependency masked as connection. This moment, this stillness in the face of chaos, is often what finally makes the narcissist realize they've lost control. Not because you screamed, "I'm done," but because you didn't say anything at all. You stopped participating. You chose peace over performance, integrity over approval. And so the narcissist, sensing that they can no longer reach you, begins to unravel. That quiet space you've created within yourself and between you becomes unbearable for them. But for you, it becomes sacred. It becomes the beginning of something real, the return to yourself. Because the moment you stop reacting is the moment you start reclaiming. And in that silence, your power speaks louder than any scream ever could.